Welcome to the Misophonia podcast. This is season 3, episode 17. My name is Adil Ahmad, and I have Misophonia. Today I'm talking to Michael, who recently graduated with a master's degree in psychology, with a study on misophonia that we talk about in this episode. Of course, we also get into Michael's miso origin story, what led him to do this research, and where he'd like to see it go. I'm getting more and more volunteers helping out with proofreading transcriptions of episodes, which has been a huge help. I'm super excited to start posting transcriptions on the site because I know a large part of the community still won't listen to podcasts, no matter how much I edit the audio and add background noise. Totally understandable, of course. But another benefit of transcriptions will be that they will be searchable for researchers looking to study this thing more, which will actually help all of us. If you want to help the cause, you can email me at hello@misophoniapodcast.com or find us on social at Misophonia Podcast on Instagram and Facebook, Misophonia Show on Twitter. All right, now let's get to my conversation with Michael. Welcome, Michael, to the podcast. It's good to have you.
Thanks, Adil. It's great to be here.
So, do you want to kind of maybe let us know where you are?
Geographically?
Yeah, roughly.
Right. I'm based a little bit south of Raleigh in a little town called Clayton, North Carolina.
Oh, yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah. Great. And are you in, you in the initial email where you booked a slot, you mentioned that you had done a study while you were in grad school. Are you still in school? Are you a student there?
No, I graduated in May of this year, which was just the perfect time to try and enter the job market.
Yeah. Seems like every 10 years it's like a complete disaster. It's kind of like a Russian roulette for trying to find a work. So what were you I guess let's maybe start there. What were you doing in grad school? Psychology, it sounded like.
Yeah, it was a master's in, well, they call it general, but it was supposed to be experimental psychology, but it's just called general psychology.
Ooh, that sounds interesting. Experimental psychology. Okay. And were you doing a project specifically related to misophonia?
Yes, because as part of the requirements of getting the master's, I had to run my own study. And so the topic of my study, obviously, was misophonia. I was looking mainly at the memory implications of misophonia because there's some evidence that at least neurologically, the systems involved with memory might play some role, and I figured a good way to test that would be to see if there was any functional impacts of it. So that's what I looked at.
Ah, interesting. Okay. And maybe do you want to talk about, did you have I guess what led you to that exploration? Like was there some prior studies that were kind of leading in that direction, or was this like something you had observed maybe in your own misophonia?
Well, it's kind of funny because the original direction was I was going to look more at attention, because hyper focusing on triggers. Like when you notice a
Oh
source,
yeah.
that's all you can focus on. I was originally going to look at that and look at variations in attention, and I was going to but I wanted it to be an online method instead of having to bring people in, which turned out to work great because I didn't start data collection until January. So halfway through, all the in-person stuff would have been canceled because of
Right.
COVID. So I'm kind of lucky I ended up going that route. But the point was to use a memory test as an indirect measurement of attention, which is a bit, probably in hindsight, not the best idea. And my thesis advisor was like, well, why don't we just look at memory? I'm like, huh. And then I went back through to look to see if any previous research had actually been done on it. And despite that little tidbit, and it was the Jasterbroths, I believe, if you know who they are, who originally mentioned the possibility of memory playing a role in it. But I couldn't find any studies that looked at memory and misophonia. So I figured that it'd be a good place to expand the knowledge a little bit.
And so what was kind of the process? So on you said this was done online. I've heard a bunch of people do a bunch of research groups do research studies, but you have to go in. Curious what the process was.
Right. So the whole process, it was actually a two-part process. The first part I actually started in December of 2019. The first process was I got 20 misophonics, or I think you call them misophones.
Yeah, yeah.
There's no
I don't
real
know if
term for it,
there's
but
right.
I got 20 Misophonics from the support group on Facebook that I'm in. I got the admin's permission to post a call
Ah,
for participation, which was nice because I probably wouldn't have been able to get that many people without it. But I posted a call, and what I had the first 20 people do was I had a list of 101 onomatopoeias, which I just for anyone who doesn't know what that is, it's the words that make that represent sounds. So like in the old Batman cartoons, the pow and a
right.
cow and that kind of stuff. But I had selected onomatopoeias related to misophonic triggers, and I don't know if you want me to say them. I don't want to accidentally trigger anyone.
You can say them, yeah, as long as we don't get into
So
making them. But yeah,
right, okay. So like crunch, slurp, smack, those specific words and stuff
yeah.
like them. And what I did is I had them rate all of those onomatopoeias on a scale of 1 to 7 in terms of how triggering they were. And I
Hmm.
used that information to make a recall memory test, which is basically you present a bunch of inputs, you distract the person, and then you later ask them to recall the things you presented them. Uh,
Mm.
and I wanted to see if, specifically, I wanted to see if misophonics remembered more words in general than controls, since as they were all misophonic stimuli, they'd be a lot more interested in them, probably stick in their head better, at least as the thought process would go. I also wanted to see if those ratings, like how triggering a word was, influenced how often a word would be remembered. Uh,
Gotcha.
And so then once I had the words, the second part was basically just administering the memory test. So I sent out the links and it was all done on Qualtrics, which
Yeah,
is like
that's
a
like a survey kind of online software.
yeah, and I had like access to the pro version that was included with my tuition as a student, so I didn't have to spend any money on that, which is nice.
Again, tuition used for good. Excellent.
Yeah, I mean, you might as well. I could go off on a tangent about all the useless things that my tuition went to, but there
Yeah,
were a few good things.
right.
But anyways, the where was I? Oh
So
yeah,
you
so
sent it, yeah, sent off the Qualtrics, and then, yeah, maybe how did you tabulate the results, and what did you find?
right, so analysis. Well, I don't want to get too technical. Uh, the way I tabulated the results was basically when I got all the information in, I piped it through SPSS to look at how many items, how often each item was recalled, specifically in terms of like what group they were in. So like I didn't really look to see like how many times crunch was recalled versus like smack, but if it was a level 5 or well actually it ended up getting broken into two groups, high triggering and low triggering. So I looked at how many high triggering items were recalled versus low triggering, and then I also looked at that data compared to were they in the mesophonic group or control group. So it was basically just a number of how many high and how many low items was how it was tabulated. And I did find a statistically significant impact of misophonia trigger quality, like being high versus low. I found an effect on recall memory. Higher items tended to be recalled more regardless than
Hmm.
lower items, which was expected. But what wasn't expected was I didn't find any impact on being mesophonic versus control.
Hmm.
They both seem to have similar recall rates. And I went into a few possible explanations for that. My best guess would probably be it was an issue of classification, because I mean, besides self-reports, like saying, "Are you mesophonic?" I wanted
Right.
to validate, are they mesophonic versus controls empirically. So I used the Amsterdam Misophonia scale, and if someone scored above the cutoff point, they were put in a mesophonic group, and if they didn't, they were put in the control group. And as it turns out, I mean, and I specifically picked that one because at the time it was like still this year, but it feels like 5 years ago. But
Tell me about it. Yeah.
but at the time it was the most widely used misophonia scale, so that's the one I went with. But there's
Yeah.
some issues with, there's not a lot of uh, evidence for its validity, so that's a possible reason. And there's there's like 50 things that could have gone into making that result wonky. But the good news was I did actually find something that would catch people's interest at the very least.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay, so you found that there was um, high level of effect on memory, at least for the high triggers. I mean,
Right.
and
Like
but it was
specifically how triggering an item was had a impact on
had
how
an impact.
often it was recalled. Yeah.
Right, but the line, but you're saying the line was a little bit blurred between the control and the people who reported misophones or misophonics, but that possibility could be that the Amsterdam scale is maybe not the best way to classify self-reported cases of misophonia.
Right. Exactly. Because I had it. Yes. Exactly. And if I go in a loop, or if I'm not explaining things properly, just let me know.
No, no, this
I
is
know
great. Yeah,
this. I've marinated in this whole thing for
yeah,
over a year now, so I might make assumptions about,
yeah.
oh, obviously they know what I'm talking about when I say this. But anyways,
No, it's
yeah,
very interesting. And so you finished, you graduated in May. You recently, the 2020 Misophonia research grants were awarded to a number of groups around, I think around the country. That might be interesting. Is maybe joining a group or pursuing misophonia research further kind of part of your something you're interested in, or was it just kind of like something something you did to finish off your degree and you're looking for other stuff now?
well, it's definitely a big motivator. Like, I want to work in
Yeah,
research,
yeah,
and that would definitely be something I want to work more in specifically.
yeah.
I'm currently sending out applications for PhD programs, so I have to keep my mind open about the specifics, because
Right.
it's all about, do your interests match with a faculty member? So I might have to have some wiggle room there. But yeah, misophonia is definitely my main interest. Being misophonic myself kind of puts that personal stake into it.
Yeah, yeah. So, and had you done work on misophonia in the past before that project?
No,
Maybe a science
no, I
fair
hadn't.
project in junior high or something?
No, no. It's funny you mentioned that. I didn't even know misophonia was a thing until
Yeah.
like my last semester of high school. Up until
Ah,
that point, I had just always referred to it as my weird sound issue.
yeah. Yes, as many of us have. Yeah, maybe we should go back. So, your weird sound issue, was that something that like how far back did it go? And is that did you tell everybody about your weird sound issue, or was that something you just kind of bottled up?
Oh, well, if I had tried to bottle it up, I definitely failed, because it was very obvious that I was not happy when those sounds were around. So no,
Yeah,
everyone knew.
yeah.
And as for how far back it goes, that's a bit interesting, because my memory of it is that it started around like mid to late middle school. But I was talking to my parents a couple weeks ago, and they mentioned something that might mean that it was actually a bit sooner. Because when I was a kid, I had this obsession with well, obsession, fear of insects that make like that buzzing noise when they
Oh
fly
yeah.
around. Like I would be distraught whenever I heard it, and I don't have that issue now. I was diagnosed with OCD, and I took medicine and therapy for that, and that seemed to help with that. But my parents brought up the point that that could be a type of misophonia, like because while triggers usually are like eating sounds, they can be like mechanical or
Of course, yeah.
animal or insects. And if that's the case, then I've been having symptoms of misophonia since I was about a year and a half, which kind of
Mm.
blew my mind when I put that together.
Yeah, I have heard one or two cases of that of people remembering things, or at least having family members point out something going back to a very early age like that. So it's not unheard of, at least to my in my experience. Um, Interesting. Okay, so yeah, so late up to mid to late, but mid to late junior high is around when you really started to become self-aware of your own misophonia. And did it start at home?
Yes. My sister used to have her best friend for a short while was living with us due to some family issues, and she tended to uh, eat very aggressively. I'll just put it,
Yeah.
and that was it was just one morning I just really noticed it, and it started annoying me, and I didn't know this until recently. My dad actually noticed my reaction to that because he's like, I remember seeing you like eating with your sister and and you just were like staring daggers at her, and because that was my
Oh yeah.
mo, is
The
that
early
I would
glare.
just, yeah, the dagger eyes, I just give that. I just couldn't handle it. Like I couldn't hold it in. But so yeah, that would be around when I first noticed it, especially specifically around like eating sounds, which
Yeah.
is where the triggers for me are now.
Did you have any other? Well, I guess did it start to proliferate, or get more start to blossom after that? Like more sounds triggering you, more people.
Yeah, yeah, that typical progression of it was focused around her, and then it spread out into
Yeah.
more contexts. I got a bit of the visual, and I have visuals too. You know, the mouth
Yeah.
moving, but that kind of waxes and wanes. So like,
Ah.
it isn't always an issue, but then sometimes it really is an issue. So I don't entirely know why, but yeah, it definitely did. And also the intensity of it also kind of
Yeah.
wavers. Like I remember
Oh.
it being extremely bad in high school. Like I remember like white knuckling a lot of classes.
Mm.
But
You think
and
it was
it would
stress
still,
related, or
you know,
because
it
that's
it
usually
might
one of
be.
the proportional comorbid starting to use inappropriately complicated words, but it's usually one of the accompanying factors is
Right.
stress level. So
It very well could have been. I mean, high school was not too terribly stressful. Well, you know what? I haven't been in high school in 6 years now.
yeah,
Now I don't remember. For me, it probably was pretty stressful, or it was a bit of a feedback loop of my misophonia adding on to the stress,
yeah,
making it
that's the
even
thing.
worse.
Right, right. Okay,
And
so
this
you're
is,
white knuckling it through, probably, just kids being kids and doing their
yeah,
stupid sounds. And okay, yeah,
yeah. It
yeah.
wasn't until, oh, sorry.
No, no, no. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, it wasn't until I want to say, when was it? Maybe a year or two into high school that it occurred to me that earplugs exist, which is my current go-to. I think you like to call it armor. Uh,
Yeah, right.
it's just to dampen it a little bit. Uh,
Yeah,
but before then, I was just bare, letting it all hit me with no sort of protection or anything. It was just, and in hindsight, it really was kind of funny. What made me think of it is I went to a shooting range and they gave me earplugs because, you know, guns are loud. And then
hmm,
it clicked. I'm like, wait, if these can block out the sounds of guns or at least make them
yeah,
tolerable,
right,
it
right.
2 plus 2 equals 4.
Yeah,
No,
there's Right. And it's interesting. So, do you have a favorite pair of or favorite brand of earplugs that you swear by?
I swear by Max, the little I think it's MACKS. You find them in they're pretty cheap. You find them in any sort of like drugstore or
Yeah.
the generics. Just those little soft flesh-colored ones. I like
Yeah.
to cut them a little bit at the end, like at the flat end, so that they don't stick out as far. And I keep a little Ziploc baggie of them in my pocket wherever I go. So I've always got them on standby.
Ah, interesting. Yeah, I've heard people throw them on keychains too. Just anything that's kind of always on them. And interesting. So earplugs, and obviously earplugs kind of dampen sound a bit, but I always kind of consider them as kind of the backup armor, and earphones or headphones that are kind of the main kind of the bazooka because you can just you know drown any sounds out. Do you use earplugs maybe just so you can like, have a better sense of what's going on around you?
Yeah, that's the main thing because even without my earplugs on and even without any sort of triggers in the area, I'm very easily distractible. Like I wander off into my head a lot and I'll stop paying attention like
Yeah.
halfway through a conversation. I'm extremely ADHD, like clinically. So I definitely didn't want to have more uh, sounds over top of anything I was trying to hear. I think one reason I didn't really use the headphones was because I didn't want to get distracted. Another thing was, especially here when it first started, my parents were never, jerks about it, but they kind of didn't. My dad specifically, he got a BA in psychology. He's
Oh.
not working in psychology. He's a recruiter now, but so he was trying to apply. Uh, he was trying to apply exposure therapy,
Ooh.
to it,
Yeah.
which I'm sure doesn't work very well for misophonia. So they weren't. They would get kind of annoyed when I'd like put headphones in. So which is actually why I started using the cut down earplugs because it wasn't as obvious. I mean,
Right.
if and of course back then we didn't have the pods, the little wireless in ear things that
Yeah.
you could hide. Uh, and especially in school, because I don't know how other people's schools were, but my school was not friendly to having like your phone or headphones on in class. Like that stuff you get written up for. So even if I did end up using that, it wouldn't have worked for class, which was, at least at that time, the biggest problem area. Being stuck in a room with people smacking and popping all day. Like, I don't
Yeah.
need to.
No, it's understood. Yeah. Absolutely. Um, yeah. That's interesting. So yeah. I wanted to ask about reactions of people around you. So obviously your dad noticed. They want to do some exposure therapy, which yeah, I haven't heard any like good reviews of exposure therapy from anyone who's been on the podcast. But how did it? They so let's back up a bit. So they you were medicated for a little bit for OCD. Did they kind of consider professional help for misophonia for you, or maybe
Yeah.
it wasn't even considered maybe a real disease until
Oh
recently?
yeah. Like back then, I didn't have a word for it. It was just my weird thing.
Weird sound issue,
Uh,
yeah.
and I was still in therapy for OCD and also regular checkups because I've also medicated for ADHD. So you have to like for the first couple of years, I think you're supposed to have someone really monitor how it's affecting you, especially when it starts that early. Because I started being medicated when I was 6 or 7, so they wanted to keep a close eye on that. But we did bring that up to her, but like most people, she hadn't heard of anything like it. So her advice, if I remember correctly, was mainly a lot of like I think the most I really remember is she suggested me mimicking the sounds to like
Right.
make like gain some control over it, which never really helped me. I never really found it helpful. Like, if anything, I think it would make me even more agitated
Mm.
because it'd be like me verbalizing, "Hey, you're being really loud and annoying," and then they don't seem to even notice, and that just adds that extra layer of like,
Yeah.
"Well, screw you, buddy," you
Yeah.
know. But
Yeah. I guess there's two. I guess some people, for some reason, are feel better if it's kind of starting to mask the other sound. But if you're doing it for the purpose of trying to broadcast your, or trying to, broadcast your displeasure in kind of a passive aggressive way, and doesn't get a reaction, yeah, I could see how it would cycle, spiral into something worse. um, yeah, interesting. Okay. Um, so mimicking is definitely something that people bring up. Um, What? How about like I don't know, like friends at school? How did it start to? Did they start to notice, and did it start to affect like who you were able to hang out with?
well, my friends were actually pretty understanding. Like, even before I had a word for it, they'd be pretty chill about it. Obviously, in situations like, well, being in the cafeteria, which actually, funny enough, wasn't that bad. Like, the whole, in a louder setting, it isn't as bad as like being in a smaller, quieter
Yeah.
setting. So at least in school, it wasn't that much of an issue. And then outside of school, uh, they might forget and like pull out a bag of chips or something, and I just gently be like, could you not? And they'd be like, oh, sorry. So
Right.
short answer was it didn't really affect me too badly because I had some really understanding friends. So I lucked out in that department at least. Uh,
Yeah.
but but I didn't tend to broadcast the issue. Like at school, only people who knew me knew about it, mainly because one, I was sort of worried about people. Like you hear about some people. I've listened to a couple of episodes of your podcast, and I can't remember who it was, but I remember someone you had on talking about how some people would like um, make triggers intentionally just to see the reaction or something.
Yes,
Uh,
most
so
people. Right.
yeah. So I was trying to avoid that. And then also just because when you really look at it rationally, I'm the one with the issue. I didn't want to, at least my thinking back then was I didn't want to put a burden on other people just to make me feel better. So most people, unless they actually knew me outside of like school or work, would have no idea I had an issue.
Right. Yeah, that's a common thing about the burden, the guilt, the shame of not
Mm.
wanting to subject other people to your own issue. And you said like around what did you say you found out they had a name like last semester of high school?
Yeah, so I don't remember why, but out of nowhere, I just decided to Google the phrase, I can't stand the sound of people eating. And then I found then a website for 4S selective sound sensitivity
Yeah.
syndrome popped up. And I'm like, oh man, it it's a thing with a name. Just a random impulse just to type in and I still to this day don't know what took me so long. Because whenever I grew up with the internet, so whenever I had an issue, I always Googled it. So
Mm-hmm.
I've always been curious as to why I never thought to Google that. But then I guess at a certain point, it just becomes such a background thing. Like, well, not background, but just like a constant. Like, you don't really question it, you know? And
Well,
then
like you
I don't know
said,
what.
it's weird sound issue. It's probably what a lot of us thought growing up is like, well, growing up, it's kind of affected us around that age where things start to get weird, and so with ourselves, and maybe we just think it's our weird kind of idiosyncrasy, so we don't bother to look it up.
But like, I actually, this might be a little off topic, but it got me thinking about it. I actually sort of specifically talking about the Googling thing because I recently contributed a blog post to differentbrains.org. It's this neurodiversity website.
Mm-hmm.
And I got in contact with the guy. I connected with the guy who runs it, Dr. Reitman, a couple months ago on LinkedIn, and he offered to let me post something on there. And what I did was I wrote basically a first person perspective of that story of me finding out about it looking into it. And then I also mixed in a bunch of like data points about current research and what we know, trying to get like a little misophonia at a glance type thing. Actually, that's the title of it, misophonia at a glance.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. And I actually got a interview with him later today at like 3 my
Oh,
time
cool. Yeah.
to talk about misophonia for his web series.
Oh, very cool. Okay. Yeah. Well, we're going to be, I'll cut this up, but, yeah, revamping the website, putting like, transcripts of every episode and all this stuff, but also have a blog section where I'm going to be looking for just guest bloggers who just kind of want to write something, about me. So if they'd like, so maybe I'll hit you up once that's finally ready.
Oh yeah,
If you're
that'd be
interested in writing something and then get your name out there. So,
I mean, considering how everything's locked down, that's the only thing I can't do at the moment.
yeah,
Just
yeah,
get
yeah,
it
yeah.
out wherever I can.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Cool. Okay. Yeah. So, so you Googled it, and yeah, issues with eating sounds or chewing is common thing that people start to Google for. So, what was that like then when you realized that? Oh my God, this is a real thing.
It was vindicating. Like I'm not crazy. Like it's a thing. It was like the most comforting thing I'd ever had in relation to the whole issue. No, like just knowing it wasn't just me was like a huge relief, and it kind of made it easier to deal with, like to an extent. Like it still bothers me, obviously, but it's like it isn't as much of a dark, isolating pit as I remember it being before I found out there were other people. It's like I might be repeating myself, but just knowing it wasn't just me kind of lessened the load, I guess I could say, of having to deal with it
Yeah, no,
constantly.
you're right. There's when you find out or when you find other people with it, there is some kind of something gets released where it it has less of an effect, at least temporarily. Um, Not sure what that connection is there, but I'm sure that will be part of some future research. But yeah, that's really interesting. A lot of people report that, and another thing a lot of people report is that once they find out it does have a name, they're often like researching it like 24/7,
Hmm.
many sleepless nights just to kind of learn everything about it because it's had such an impact on your life.
Oh yeah, definitely, and that's definitely what I did, and especially the name thing, like being able to say, "Hey, I have misophonia," and maybe I have to obviously I have to tell them what that is, but having a name to it instead of saying, "Hey, I'm just kind of weird about sounds." Having a name to it, I think, also makes people more likely to like take you seriously because it sort of makes it gives it legitimacy in some sense, I think.
So
Just
did you start to run into the streets and start saying, skipping along, I have misophonia. Here's what it's all about, or was it something you
not the
selectively told people?
well, not the streets. But I did crash through the hallways of my house,
Yeah, there
telling
you
everyone
go.
who was home about it.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, told all my friends and family like the second I found out about it, and then after that, it kind of went back to being something I sort of just keep to myself, just because again, it was the whole not wanting to bring attention to it in me specifically and bothering other people with it. But if, for instance, I had one time in undergrad when someone, and I'm sure other people have noticed my earplugs, but I most of the time I never get comments on it. I'm pretty sly about keeping them in and they fit well. But I had one guy meant come up to me and ask me. We were like acquaintances, that sort of quote unquote friends you have in one class, and then once that class is over, you're just like, all right, have fun existing,
Yeah.
bye. But he was like, "Do you, are those earplugs?" And I'm like, yeah, I have misophonia, and it's this." I explained it to him, and he's like, "Huh, interesting." And
And
then
you
he
never
was,
heard from him again? Just
well,
kidding.
well, that came later. But what he did tell me was that sounds a lot like my brother. And that's another thing I've been hearing too, is like the more
Ah,
I talk to people about it, the more common I've seen it to be, right? Like earlier this year, before everything shut down, I was at a conference, a psychology conference in Vegas, presenting my in progress data for my thesis project. And almost every person who came by to look at my poster was like, "Oh, that sounds like my daughter," or "Huh, that sounds like this guy I know." It's like they didn't have a name for it, but a lot of people seem to understand what you mean when you describe it to
yeah,
me.
I think it's highly underreported or under diagnosed condition. So
Which
that's,
makes sense because there
yeah,
isn't even a real diagnostic criteria yet. Uh, because the DSM is like, nah, we're not going to put it in there yet. But I'm
right.
sure you know about that.
Right. Yeah, that comes up at the convention every year. Is like, what codes should we put this under for various treatments? So, and after you found out how to name, I'm curious, did that start to change how you were coping with it? Other than, telling people, did you find other coping mechanisms, or have kind of earplugs been kind of your solid go-to?
Definitely, most pretty much just stuck with the earplugs. As they were working well enough, and I didn't want to rock the boat. So it didn't really change my coping methods, but I think it just made them, at least for a little bit, made them more effective. Because,
Hmm.
you get that little high of knowing, oh my
Yeah.
goodness, this is a thing. But other than that, I think things stayed pretty much the same.
Yeah. And how about these days, like day to day? Are you living, in a relatively quiet place? It sounds like you have some new neighbors that need to be dealt with decisively. No, but yeah, how is the day to day for you these days?
These days, it's not misophonia wise, it's not that much of an issue. Because currently, since I graduated and haven't been able to get a job because the whole world
Like
shut down,
world, yeah, 2020,
uh,
yeah.
I've moved back in with my parents for a bit, and since they already know about me, and we kind of worked out a system while I was growing up, so that hasn't been an issue. Uh, the job I currently have, I've got a stopgap job, my old delivery driver route with Domino's, and that doesn't usually pose much of an issue because, I mean,
You don't
when
have
I'm
to watch
in
the
this,
people eat, you just give them the food,
yeah,
and you're out of
exactly.
there.
Like the worst thing that would happen is maybe a coworker is popping gum
Oh
like in the
yeah.
store, but my store is very busy, and since I'm a driver, I spend most of my time
Yeah,
coming in, grabbing stuff, and then immediately leaving, so I don't
right.
spend a lot of time around it.
Um, I'm sure, we have a lot of young people listening and parents. Curious maybe to hear about this, system you worked out with your parents. Is it just like maybe a warning system or kind of a meal, like a etiquette around meals? I'm curious what you guys have going on there.
Well, this system, I made it sound a lot more formal than it actually is in reality, but basically, it's just that if I'm like coming through
Yeah,
if I'm walking through the room to like get somewhere because of the layout of the house, if they're like in the living room eating something, they'll like pause for a little bit to let me get by, and then I can grab my stuff and then I leave. If we're all hanging out and if we're going to like if we're eating in the living room, because we don't, funny enough, we have a dining room table, but we kind of just like if we're eating together, we just like go in the living room to watch TV, and usually they'll strategically get foods that are not loud, like chips and stuff like that. They'll usually try to keep that to a minimum, and then the biggest thing is they don't get offended if I just up and leave. It's just like, all right, that's enough exposure for today. I'm gonna go to my room and detox for a little bit. You
yeah.
know,
This is
because that's
fantastic.
another
Yeah.
thing is just I would think is that, and that I remember actually from high school, is that feeling of guilt that you mentioned, when you like walk up and leave. It's like, man, I look like a jerk just like leaving in the middle of something. But once they know and they understand, hey, I'm just I can't handle any more of this, but you also deserve to have sustenance, So it's a good compromise. I leave for a few minutes, then I come back, and then everything's good.
Yeah. That recovery period for you, is it, it can just be very quick. And so does it tend to be pretty quick, especially maybe when you have this kind of a understanding with people? At least for me, if there is some kind of a acknowledgement of the a trigger, then the recovery time is shorter. But if it just feels like there's a lot of ignorance around it, then it could take a lot, much longer time because you're dealing with that sense of you're under attack intentionally.
Right. And that is it definitely does play a big role that understanding does make it a lot quicker. Uh, but on the flip side, when they do mess up, or if someone does mess
Oh
up,
yeah,
it makes it a little bit more of a punch, because then it's like with strangers, it's like, well, they don't know. But if
right.
it's someone it's like, what you did.
That'll be
But
the teaser quote of this episode. You know
oh,
what you
okay.
did. Um,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, I guess at that point it takes a while to get your mind around the idea that it was just like a slip up or a mistake. But yeah, I can see how we would go, us Misophones and Misophones would go directly to the that was intentional. You're trying to get at me for something because you know.
Yeah. Yeah, but fortunately, that's just like a quick impulse, and
Yeah,
then it fades away. Uh,
that's great. Especially and I'm sure regulars would find it weird that the visual of us walking into a room and then everyone else freezing for a second. But I think everyone listening knows exactly what we're talking about, and would definitely appreciate something like that. Because yeah, I mean, at that point, it's like for me, I noticed it's like it's not just the sounds, but it could be the visuals. Like I don't want to, like I just want to be able to walk through a room and not see something. And it's especially annoying when I'm walking through a room because it's like, okay, this should be quick. I'm not staying here. I shouldn't be getting visually triggered because that would kind of piss me off double that I get visually triggered just for like doing a
right.
quick flyby. Anyways, fascinating, good stuff on good work with your parents there. Are you still looking at the research that's going on out there? Is there anything that you'd like to point out or anything that looks promising?
Uh, yes, actually. I regularly attend the webinars that Dr. Brout has with her research network.
Dr. Jennifer
I've
Brown
also
at Duke, yeah.
Yeah. And also the Duke Center for Motion and Duke Center for Misophonia and Emotional Regulation, which is something that they opened up like I want to say fall of last year, has already started putting out some good stuff. They've developed a new self-report measure, which isn't uh, the research on it hasn't been published, but you can't actually get a copy of it. And from what I can understand, it's probably going to be a lot more valid of a measurement scale,
Mm,
which is going to be nice because when I do get a chance to do more misophonia research, would probably want something better than the Amsterdam scale. Yeah, and then the Duke quarterly research update. I, if you look up if you just Google Duke Misophonia Center, you'll
hmm
be able to find the actual website of what the lab is called. And their quarterly updates got have a lot of good information. Like I remember they had one not too long ago. They were going over some research that was looking at modifying certain treatment methods based on the McGurkin effect, I think it's called. I don't know if you know this. It's if you play a if you play a video of just someone's mouth, like saying like "daw," like just
Yeah.
saying the word "daw," but you superimpose. No, wait. If you, I got that backwards. If you play an audio clip of someone saying "daw," but then you superimpose a visual of someone's mouth making "ba," your brain will actually hear it as ba instead, because visual information tends to overwrite or inform your processing of auditory information. And they were looking at that, and they did something similar. Can't remember who they were. I'd have to look up the lab again that actually ran that study. But they did something similar with like making visuals of like someone tearing a piece of paper, but they superimposed the sounds of someone eating hard candy to see if that visual association of something non-triggering with something triggering would actually lessen the effect. And they actually found that they could lessen the impact of misophonia triggers by pairing them with positive stimuli. So sort of like the opposite of how triggers tend to develop, where you get that negative association. They're looking at instead of exposure therapy, trying to desensitize people to triggers, which, as we know, does not work very well. They're looking at trying to change the nature of the association people have with those sounds.
Right. So keeping a sensitivity, not messing with that sensitivity, but kind of bending it back towards a more positive association.
Yeah, that's my understanding of it.
Yeah.
I have to go back and look through it because I got like halfway through that video when it was live, and then something happened, and I had to leave before it finished. But I have the recording of it. I just haven't had a chance to finish watching it.
It's interesting.
But yeah, I definitely recommend looking them up too.
Yeah, no, I heard about the group. I didn't realize there was a quarterly newsletter or whatever. That's really interesting. I'll look that up and try to report stuff. In the podcast, I was thinking of having, basically reporting more news on top of these one-on-one conversations.
Oh,
that's
definitely.
Interesting. Yeah,
that's a good idea because. I mean, research in the last 10 years for misophonia has really been ramping up. Like, that's where most of the good research has been, is in the last 10 years. So you can collect all this information that's already there. It'll be a lot easier to keep people up to date once new stuff starts pouring in.
Yeah, and this new research fund, I think, is just going to multiply that. So that's great. Cool. Well, Michael, it's been really interesting, just kind of hearing about your background, but also kind of the research that you've been in and that you've heard about. Anything else you want to tell folks about miso? Maybe your own, or something you've heard, or maybe something you'd hope to research.
Something I'd hope to research. Dang.
I left that open. I mean, it could be any of those things, but
right. Dang, those are all good possible avenues.
I tend to leave my questions a little too wide open, and then people are like, what am I trying to say?
First of all, the big thing I would imagine is we'd need to do enough research to really describe misophonia clinically and get it a diagnostic code, because while the Misophonia Research Fund you're talking about, was it the Ream Foundation that you're thinking of?
Yeah, exactly. Milken Institute, Ream Foundation, yeah.
Right,
because go by a bunch of different names.
Because that's great, but without like a diagnostic code, it's a lot harder to get research from places like the National Institute of Health or something, and we're going to need a lot more research to really get to the nitty-gritty of things. So if we can, as a field, and I always look at it through a psychological lens because I'm a psych major, but I also think that it's important that it's studied through multiple modalities or professions. So like audiologists still need to play a role, because I remember when you were talking to Dr. Johnson, there was that, and she was going through, originally people were telling her like, this is a psych problem, what the hell are you doing with this? It's like,
right.
No, because she's an audiologist and it's an auditory issue. Like, so every relevant or even somewhat relevant group field needs to come together and work on actually defining it, because that's the big thing.
There's no need to be territorial
without a definition,
about it, right?
Yeah, because without a definition, it's not going to get in any diagnostic code.
Yeah.
So I guess that would probably be my top pick of where the research should go first. And then after that, like you said, there's like a whole world that you could explore with it. I'm trying not to ramble too much.
No, this is interesting. I didn't even think, I mean, I know about diagnostic codes, but I didn't realize how pivotal they are in opening up doors to potential research. I mean,
Right.
if
And
there's,
this is not my knowledge because, I'm not, I had one study under my belt. This is stuff I've heard from actually, I'm pretty sure that was mentioned in the webinar I was talking about, how that's important, getting those codes to get funding. But yeah, that's definitely important because without money, science doesn't happen. It's a sad fact of life. But
right. Interesting. Okay. Well, yeah. Well, let's leave it on that note. Hopefully, somebody else will pick up the baton, or we can all work together to make that happen and get even more research going on. I'm cautiously optimistic, despite everything that's happening otherwise in the world. Cautiously optimistic that the 20s to 2020s might hold some good answers or treatments for misophonia.
yeah, get all the bad karma out right at the beginning, so the rest of this decade can be just good times.
Exactly. Well, let's leave it on that note then. Thank you, Michael, for coming on and sharing all this great information with us.
Oh, absolutely, Adil. I love coming on here, and I also love listening to this. Not to stretch it out too much longer, but because I actually have learned a couple of things listening to the people talk on the podcast. So it's definitely a good resource to get that good qualitative, descriptive data that's kind of hard to come by elsewhere.
Yeah. No, appreciate that, and I'm glad that's happening. That was definitely a big part of starting this. So thanks.
Not a problem.
Thanks again, Michael. Always great to hear about research and hear from researchers, especially those that have the condition that they are in fact researching. Remember, you can reach out anytime on Instagram or Facebook at Misophonia Podcast or Twitter at Misophonia Show. Email at hello@misophonicpodcast.com. If you're enjoying the shows, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts. Music, as always, is by Moby. And until next week, wishing you peace and quiet.